116 minutes, one goal for glory, up steps Andres Iniesta. And that was just the cherry on top of what was arguably the greatest World Cup in modern history. But let me take you back and explain just how good this World Cup was, because I bet you forgot quite a lot of these key parts. Let's start June 2010, the first ever World Cup in Africa. The vibes are high, vuvuzelas everywhere, just this buzzing noise. But even before then, the vibes for this tournament were so high. The music, which I can't play for copyright reasons, the fans, literally everything was just coming together perfectly. Like always, the hosts kick off the competition. That's South Africa versus Mexico. 94,000 people in attendance. And about 93,000 of them were cheering for the massive underdog South Africa. And in the 55th minute, history was made. A name remembered forever. Tshabalala, left foot, top corner. Goal for South Africa, goal for all of Africa. It will be remembered for so long, and this are of the group stages of a star-studded World Cup. Just listen to some of these names. Miroslav Klose, Diego Forlan, David Villa, Wesley Sneijder, John Terry, Frank Lampard, Arjen Robben, Lucas Podolski, Rapinho, Carlos Tevez, Chicharito. I could literally go on forever. To truly explain the quality of this World Cup, you have Italy with Chiellini, Cannavaro, Zambrotta, De Rossi, Gattuso, Pirlo, and they finished bottom of their group after winning the previous World Cup. Believe it or not, they actually finished below New Zealand, who went unbeaten in the competition with 3 draws. New Zealand, who were the second worst rated team at the World Cup, with the worst rated team being North Korea, who only got beat by Brazil, one of the favourites of the competitions, 2-1. Yep, North Korea almost got a point against Brazil. Now admittedly they did lose 7-0 to Portugal in the next leg, then 3-0 to the Ivory Coast, and it sort of goes a bit downhill for the boys, but we're going to avoid that for now. Even if you remember the fact that Italy got knocked out because they won the World Cup previously, and there's a bit of a trend with that, do you remember France, who had Thierry Henry, Patrice Evra, Hugo Lloris, Frank Ribéry, because they also finished last and got knocked out. They finished below South Africa, the hosts. And to be honest, in some ways, it actually wasn't surprising that France struggled in the 2010 World Cup, because they nearly didn't qualify. They actually had to go through a qualifying round, in which is now probably the most infamous qualifying round in the history of qualifying rounds, because they played Ireland, where Thierry Henry clearly handled the ball twice before he assisted William Gallas. An absolute infamous moment. And it got more infamous in the selection because the French manager actually left out Benzema, Samir Nasri, Ben Arfa and Vieira in his selections. In fact, the French 2010 World Cup journey could be a video on itself. At half-time of the second game, Nicolas Anelka was surprisingly subbed off for Gignac. Well, that was after he had clashed with the manager, and at full-time he refused to apologise, so was sent home. That caused absolute uproar in the French squad. Evra was fighting with the fitness man, people were refusing to train. They eventually sorted it out for the final game against South Africa, but to be honest, they looked disjointed, not interested, and the red card is basically the end of them as they end up losing 2-1 to South Africa. And despite the fact you already know who won the competition with the most ridiculous golden generation squad there's potentially ever been in international football, you might forget the fact they lost their first game 1-0 to Switzerland. This competition was just wild from the start to the end. Wait till you hear the rest of it. To kick off some of the most eventful knockout football, we have Uruguay versus South Korea. Yes, South Korea and North Korea were both in this World Cup. Now that didn't really matter when it came down to it because Luis Suarez was on fire with 2 goals, making sure Uruguay go through 2-1 winners, and I'm sure he will do nothing controversial in these upcoming rounds. Then we move on to the United States versus Ghana, with some iconic faces like Kevin Prince Boateng, Landon Donovan, Clint Dempsey, Asamoah Gyan. It's 1-1 in the 93rd minute when a long ball's played over the top. Asamoah Gyan holds off two players, slots it in the roof of the net. Ghana progress as 2-1 winners, only the third time an African nation has ever made it that far, and they're doing it in Africa. And if you thought the iconic, controversial moments were going to stop there, you are absolutely wrong. We roll in to a fixture for the ages, a derby match in international football, Germany versus England. Now, what you'll remember from this game is a Frank Lampard goal, or not so goal, because clearly over the line at 2-1 the goal is ruled out. Germany go on to win 4-1, but what could have happened if that Lampard goal stood and it was 2-2 with momentum on England's side? The next fixture was another international sort of derby, Argentina versus Mexico. This was just peak Tevez scoring 2 goals in a 3-1 win. However, a little bit of controversy because of course the first goal was miles offside. The Netherlands also beat Slovakia 2-1 with a curling left foot shot from, can you guess who? Of course, Arjen Robben. Brazil cruised through into the next round with a 3-0 win against Chile. Paraguay and Japan ended 0-0, but Paraguay going through on penalty shootout. Then arguably the biggest clash of the round of 16. You have Iker Casillas' Spain versus Cristiano Ronaldo's Portugal, where Spain get a cagey 1-0 win. I've just been rewatching the quarterfinals and the quality is so high and the controversy isn't stopping either. But before we get into that, I'm going to be educating and building hype all the way to the 2026 World Cup. So if you want more of this, like it and subscribe to the channel. In the first of the quarterfinal games, we have Brazil versus the Netherlands. And I need to highlight some of the quality on show here. The front four for the Netherlands, Van Persie, Kout, Schneider, Robben, compared with the all-round quality of Brazil, Robinho, Kaká, Maicon, Lucio, Julio Cesar. Brazil take an early lead through Robinho, a goalkeeper mistake, but it doesn't last long because Wesley Sneijder, who is really in a world of his own at this tournament, he gets 2 goals for the Dutch team. And from then, Brazil sort of capitulate. Felipe Melo clearly loses his head. A clear stamp for a second yellow card gets him sent off, which most of you would think would end the game for Brazil, or at least end their hopes. You would be wrong. The Netherlands shaky at the back, the goalkeeper mistake at the end, but still, it's not enough. The Dutch team see it through. And you all know that is just the start, because up next we have one of the most controversial games in World Cup history, Uruguay-Ghana. Now, Ghana go into this as the underdogs, but with some decent players in there. Compare that to Uruguay, overall a weak squad, but attacking-wise, Cavani, Diego Forlan, Luis Suarez, they've got that firepower. So when Suleiman Tari launches a 30-yarder on the stroke of half-time and it squeezes past the goalkeeper, of course the stadium erupts. Unfortunately for Africa, it doesn't last long because 10 minutes later, Diego Forlan scores a free kick from a ridiculous angle. And after a few missed chances for either team across 90 minutes and the 120 minutes, that's it. Until the 122nd minute. Ghana whip it in, header, rebound, header again, open goal, saved by Luis Suarez with his hand. A straight red card, a penalty for Ghana. And you know what happens next. Asamoah Gyan misses the penalty. He hits the bar and it's full time. Luis Suarez, who's off the pitch, is celebrating. But is Suarez celebrating too soon? They still need to win the penalty shootouts. No. Uruguay go on and beat Ghana in the penalty shootouts and qualify to the semi-finals of the World Cup, in which is probably the most unfair World Cup game in history. Then we move on to a star-studded quarter-final. Argentina, managed by Diego Maradona, versus Germany, managed by Joachim Löw. And I wanted to read out some of the big names so you could understand how big this fixture was, but I really can't narrow it down, so I'm going to read both starting lineups. For Germany, in goal, Neuer, then Lahm, Mertesacker, Fredericks, Boateng, Schweinsteiger, Khedira, Müller, Ozil, Podolski, Klose. Even on the bench, they've got players like Toni Kroos, Mario Gomez. It is wild. On the other side, for Argentina, you've got Romero, Otamendi, Di Michaelis, Bodicio, Heinze, Mascherano, Rodriguez, Di Maria, Messi, the Ballon d'Or winner, Higuain and Tevez. Even their bench has Diego Milito, Walter Samuel and a young Sergio Aguero. So this should be a close affair. And to be honest, it could have been if it wasn't for two World Cup icons who bring their best game during the World Cup. Miroslav Klose and Thomas Müller. It was a 4-0 whitewash for Germany, and to be honest, it wasn't close at all. Final game of the quarters was Paraguay, who had some big names like Rocky Santa Cruz, Oscar Cardozo, Nelson Valdez, and they're going against Spain, whose entire team and bench was star-studded. So I know what you're thinking. Spain probably smashed them or dominated them. But you would be wrong. This is one of the biggest what-if games in football. Because, yes, Spain come out the winners. But to start, Paraguay get a penalty. That is the first highlight of the game. And it's saved by Iker Casillas. Then Spain go and get a penalty. And Xabi Alonso misses the penalty. Then the winning goal is David Villa, who hits the post again, and then goes in. If that just had gone the other side of the post, or if the penalty was scored, what would have happened? Spain's golden generation, they might not have had that World Cup, the first ever World Cup for Spain. As we move on to the semi-finals for a World Cup that has been filled with drama, quality, controversy, do you think they would let you down? Of course not. We start off with Uruguay versus Netherlands, and Giovanni Van Bronckhorst launches one of the most ridiculous goals in World Cup history to start. In the 40th minute, that lead is cancelled out by a man in inspired form. Diego Forlan scores his 5th goal of the competition, equal top scorer across the entire competition. Comment below the other 3 players you think were top scorers. But in the 70th minute, the Dutch team just apply the pressure and finally get that breakthrough. Wesley Sneijder, then shortly after, Arjen Robben makes it 3-1. A late consolation goal makes it 3-2, but Netherlands, of course, get to the final. Now, if the first semi-final was for drama, the second semi-final is for quality, because it's that Germany side that I mentioned before against this Spain team. I honestly have to read it out. Casillas, Ramos, Puyol, Piqué, Capdeville, Busquets, Xavi, Alonso, Iniesta, David Villa, Pedro. On the bench, Pepe Reina, Victor Valdez, Raul Albiol, Javi Martinez, Arbeloa, Jesus Navas, Cesc Fabregas, David Silva, Juan Mata, Fernando Llorente, Fernando Torres. It is just the most outrageous World Cup team or squad I have ever seen. But the Germany squad isn't far off either. It was a hugely contested affair. It was very tight. Spain were dominating possession, as you would expect. Then in the 73rd minute, a bullet header from Carlos Puyol gets the job done. And of course, an infamous final, not for its goals, but for its refereeing decisions. From the Dutch starting 11, 8 of them were yellow carded. 1 of them was actually sent off. From the Spanish team, 5 of the starting 11 were red carded. And honestly, there should have been at least 1 more, because this tackle from De Jong is one of the worst tackles ever seen in football that did not receive a red card. And as much as people consider this the final that Iniesta won, what a lot of people don't consider is the final that Arjen Robben should have or could have won. 2 one-on-one chances. At one point he could have gone down for a penalty and probably a red card. It's just the way football goes. Because, of course, in the 116th minute, Iniesta slots it to make the golden generation finally crowned with their World Cup. But I do think people forget round of 16, Spain 1-0 win. Quarter-final, Spain 1-0 win. Semi-final, Spain 1-0 win. The final, Spain 1-0 win. Maybe that's just how they get the job done, and the job is done. But you tell me, what World Cup do you want recap next?